I got admitted to my doctoral program, I was like, okay, I want to create a platform where I remember and also share my experience of being the only Latina in my master's program, but let me also share in real time my doctorate journey. Right. And authentically, I'm now about to hit like 6 years of having this platform. Authentically, Latinas with Masters became not only my method of survival when I was going through the merger.
Hello, Futuras Cash Libres. Welcome back to the show. Today, I have one of my favorite people on the world of Instagram, Doctora Cristina Rodriguez. Thank you so much for coming to the show. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you for welcoming me into your space. I'm excited.
I'm excited because I feel like trajiste la vibe, trajiste la energy that a lot of us could really use right now. So thank you for that. So I want to start by talking a little bit about your background, your parents' background, because you are indeed my first Nicaraguan.
Ooh, okay, girl, clock it. I'm claiming it. I'm claiming that. And you know what? That's part of the journey. The part of the journey is that I'm most likely the first or the only, right? Nicoya, Nicaragüense, Nica in the room, right? And I own it. So thank you for asking that question as, the first question. And so I'm first generation born in the San Francisco Bay Area. My parents did migrate here from Nicaragua during the late, 70s, early 80s. And for those that are aware of what was happening, the political climate in Nicaragua, it was during a Sandinista revolution. My parents were not involved in that, but the whole country was affected by the impact, for good or for bad, of what the revolution was. So my parents had an opportunity to come here to the United States. And yeah, I mean, talk about being, raised in an immigrant household, like Spanish was my first language. I only talk to you in Spanish and I have the videos and the audio to prove it. And it wasn't until I went to elementary school, right? When I went into preschool and kindergarten is when I had to learn English in the classroom. And they even sent a letter to my dad that my dad even has to this day that says, please don't talk to Cristina in Spanish. We don't understand her. She needs to like talk English more, right? And I hold that with pride, like I think part of education or part of Latinos navigating education is for us to conform, right, to the dominant culture of English, wanting to erase our heritage and our language. And that goes way beyond us. Like that even happens in Nicaragua and happens in Mexico with indigenous cultures, right? So the fact that that was even a thing as an educator to look back on that and be like, wow, that's unfortunately part of my journey too, But yeah, no, I'm a proud daughter of Nicaraguan immigrants. I wear that with my sleeve. As you can see, I have a lot of Nicoya pride on my Latinos with Masters page, but I have a lot of Latino pride. I have a lot of cultural pride, for everyone, right, to feel inclusive and belonging.
Yes, and I love that you said how you used to primarily speak Spanish at home. And because I feel that for many of us, English was chosen for us. Like it's not that we decided, yes, we want to be part of this outside version of the American dream that a lot of people that don't live in this country see, right? They see like the Beatles, they see like all these things growing up. Like, no, like it's a little bit different right here. So I thank you for touching on that. Now, I do want to ask you, do you speak Spanish now, like at home, or how does it look like for you now as an adult?
Yeah, so I do speak Spanish in my home. My husband is Mexican, also first generation, Mexicano born here. So we do speak Spanish at home. My parents lived with us for quite some time because when they retired, in full transparency, they couldn't afford the market rate, right, of an apartment because the apartment was included in my dad's salary as a maintenance supervisor. So my parents lived with me for about 6 years and all we talked was Spanish, right? Like talk about, healing my inner child, living back with my parents as a full grown adult. But that also helped increase, the language with my kids. And my kids actually go to a Spanish immersion school. So they're learning Spanish at school, but more like grammatically, linguistically, right? But like los dichos nicaragüenses, right? That's in the home. So yeah, I do speak Spanish fluently. There's times where I feel like my no sabo kid comes out and my parents get mad, like, ¿cómo se te va a olvidar esa palabra? A Cristina se le está olvidando el español, right? And I'm like, when have I used this word? Like I've never even like come across this word. So they're constantly comparing my Spanish with my sister. I have an older brother who came here when he was 2. And we all speak Spanish fluently, but I feel like my parents lightweight be like, pinning who speaks better Spanish, right? I personally, I don't like reading anything in Spanish. I feel like the translation and the comprehensive for me, I'm like, okay, okay, I
Dios
read
mío.
it. So let me reread it to understand it because I read it that I'm acknowledging is in front of my face, right? I'm obviously more comfortable in the English language. But the funny thing is that my parents talk to me in Spanish and I respond in English to them. So I feel like we're both constantly like continuing to like perfect, right? Our comprehension in both Spanish and English. So it's like a beautiful dynamic to have
Yeah, I
both.
love it. I love it. And by the way, you might not know this about me, but my daughters also go to a bilingual school. So half of the day is in English and half of it
Mhm.
is in Spanish. And I feel like over the last couple of years, I really have been reclaiming my Spanish because I used to be bullied for speaking Spanish, not so much by the school, but by my classmates because I in their words, I used to speak Spanish that was muy presumido. So they always like bully me, like nadie te entiende. And so I kind of like, okay, I'm not gonna speak it because I don't want to be bullied, in the high school. And so I kind of just let that go. And now with my nenas, we're learning exactly what you're saying, like the grammatical way of writing it. And even there's so many words that they come and ask me, and I'm like, no tengo ni idea what that means. But
Don't ask me about an accent. If there's an accent, there's times where I say like my imposter syndrome is in front of my parents when I speak Spanish or if I'm reading something, right? Because they're like, ¿Qué? ¿Qué es eso? And I'm like, oh, wait, hold on a second. And then that's where my parents will be like, a vos se te está olvidando el español, right? And so then it's like, I've never even pronounced this word. I don't even know how to pronounce it, right? But yeah, no, I think that's very important to understand that we are definitely reclaiming our language, like we're fortunate that we can still have this, right? But I know that there's generations, right, that third, fourth, fifth intentionally did not teach Spanish to their kids, right? So their kids and their future generations wouldn't experience discrimination based on, language, based on an accent, based on, how they pronounce things. So that's a very real thing to this day.
yes, 100%. Oh my God, I'm getting goosebumps because I'm like, me encanta esta conversación. And we speak Spanglish here, by the way, if we feel like it. So whatever works for you. But I want to talk to you about education and why was that so important for you growing up to become a doctora? Because believe it or not, I grew up in a town where the only doctores were white men. There were no doctoras. Very few later on in my life, white women. But I did not grow up seeing a Latina that was a doctora. So walk us through your journey on why was that so important for you, and also mention a couple of maybe hurdles that you have to jump to get to where you are today.
Absolutely. I feel like being a doctora wasn't originally the dream or the vision, right? I feel like as Latinos, I definitely feel like we are pushed into like, professional fields, right? Like, grow up to be a doctor, grow up to be a lawyer, grow up to these things that are like safe, right? But when they say doctor, they mean like a medical doctor, right? Not necessarily an educational doctor. So I didn't really know that existed for a very long time. Even though technically like the history of doctors started in education. They were the ones teaching medical doctors how to become doctors. So, fun fact, go look it up. So, I originally wanted to be an immigration attorney. That was the goal, that was the vision, that was the plan. You couldn't convince me otherwise, right? I had a lot of family members that were deported and then just seeing things on the news. I grew up on Telemundo and Univision, you guys, Primer Impacto. I'm like, oh my God, these people are getting deported. It's so sad. Like things we are still seeing today. So the dream was always to become an immigration attorney. I definitely feel that I changed my major from criminal justice to Raza studies because I was part of the Puente program, which is a program that helps first generation Latinos transfer to a four-year university by taking transferable English courses. So that's the first time that I was exposed to Latino authors and Latino literature, right? The stories of us. And so then my thought process was like, okay, I could always learn law. I still got to go to law school. Let me major in raza studies where I understand why people migrate here. I want to learn about people's stories, right? So then I graduated, I transferred to San Francisco State. I got my degree in raza studies. And then I was still working in housing. Housing was my 9 to 5. I was a leasing agent, an assistant manager, a property manager. And then, but the doors kept on opening for me. And so then I just went with my gut feeling, was like, okay, they're paying me more over here. They're giving me an opportunity here. Let me follow suit with that. And so then I stayed in the position that was comfortable, right? I'm married, I have a family now. So I'm thinking about putting food on the table and having a roof over my head, like my parents taught me. And then I decided to go back to school to get my master's. I had a resident who I became very close with, and she was like, you should get your master's in business. And I never considered myself a businesswoman. I was like, no, why would I do that? I want to do like ethnic studies. Maybe I want to go back to I want to like think about going to law school again. And she was like, you are a businesswoman. You do payroll, you do budgets, you hire, you manage a multi-million dollar property. And I'm like, what? Like, I was like, are you for real? Like, employers do a very good job of making you feel like an employee and not a businesswoman or a businessman or a business
Oh,
person, right? Clock that on Hola, a wealth podcast. But I was literally like, oh my God, like, I don't know. I had like an epiphany. So I went back to school. I got my master's in business and marketing. I had my second child during grad school. So I was experiencing prepartum depression, and our parents were talking about no depression, right? So I had no idea what
this
that
is
was.
normal.
That was, yeah. So then I went through that, but I ended up getting my master's. And then again, housing was opening all these doors. And then something about being in housing for so long, I was just honestly tired of making landlords rich. Like, there was just this one conversation I had with the resident, and it was like, I can't pay my rent. Can you give me to the 15th? Which is common. That's common, right? But something about those conversations, I was like, why are we normalizing this? Like, why are we keep increasing the rent on people that we know they can't afford it? Like, the housing market is insane. So something about it was like, let me go back to school to get a doctorate degree in education. I was doing somewhat of my research, and I was like, well, let me get a doctorate degree. Like, I don't know if I still qualify to get into law school, but let me just go this way, right? Like, I just kind of looked it up and I'm like, okay, bachelor, master's, okay, done. Like, I don't know, like I just applied, right? But I think also was I was looking at other influencers online, right? That had their doctors too. And the first one that I came across was Doctorahood, which is with Doctora Lorena Marquez, right? And I ended up buying a shirt from her that said Future Doctora. And that was the shirt that I wore when I announced that I got admitted into my doctoral program, which is also the first podcast guest of the Latinas with Masters podcast, right? Like, everything I did was very intentional. But I saw like academic mommy, academic soul, and I was like, man, like that's kind of dope to like have a doctorate degree and like work in education, and like you have all these benefits of like tuition for your kids, like now I'm thinking future, right? I'm thinking of like upward mobility. I'm thinking of financial literacy, financial wealth, like for my kids, right? Like, I'm already a homeowner, but what else can I give to my kids? So I feel like that was the motivation behind getting a doctorate degree. And then, girl, the barriers are there. I'm telling you, we are definitely navigating a system that was not designed for me to walk across that stage. Like, some of the barriers that I experienced was a merger, like my school, Mills College, was currently being closed, right, for financial reasons, right? And so then Northeastern University, that's based out in Boston, acquired Mills College. From a business point of view, I get that. I've done many mergers at apartment complex. I know how it works. What the institution failed was for it to be student centered. It failed communicating with the students. It failed asking for our opinion, our thoughts. How can we better support you in this merger? Let me reassure you that you will graduate. All these things that we all thrive for were not so common and were not obvious. So I question whether I should be in that program. I question whether I was going to graduate. And higher education is very good at making you feel like an individual. They don't want you to be in community, right? So I experienced a lot of barriers, but then I thought like, wow, what a learning opportunity. The same institution that is giving me my education is the same institution that's taking it away. So then I decided to put it back on them and use, my tuition dollars that I paid for because it was not free, use my education to throw it back at them, right? You guys love buzzwords? Well, here's a buzzword. That's not my college catalog. I didn't sign up for that. I'm not taking extra classes. I don't care if it's free. I don't care if you're not going to charge me. Time is money, and you're taking away from me spending time with my kids. That is time, and that's very valuable. So my cohort decided to write a letter to the provost, and I used my Latinas with Masters platform. And I said, if you do not meet these, not demands, but like if you don't meet these accommodations or hear us out, you're insulting us as doctoral students. And also, I'm going to use my platform to expose the way that you're really treating us doctoral students. And the next email I got was, congratulations, you're starting your dissertation. And I was like, great. That's all I ever wanted. Like I was already,
Pause right here because I have a listener right now who's probably already thinking, holy guacamole, like that is so audacious.
yeah.
But not everyone is a Cristina. And not everyone will come back and say, hold on a minute.
Hmm.
Here is what I see wrong. Especially right now, I feel like there's so many setbacks that we are experiencing that we will continue to experience. So, what would you say to that person that sees something that isn't fair right now, but is afraid to speak up? Because I'm like, give me some of that, girl.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I talked about this in my podcast with Doctora Mara Lopez. Like, I'm very big on like looking at something and looking at what's missing from there. Like, what's the gap, right? What's the void? And I feel like people are quick to be like, well, our policy says this, but I flip it. I'm like, well, the policy doesn't say this though. Like, you're telling me what the policy says, but it also does not say, right? And I'll give you an example. Like, there's a lot of people that unfortunately are threatened by my Latinas with Masters platform. And I was told that I couldn't promote it on campus. Like, I couldn't wear a shirt that says Latinas with Masters. And I'm like, where does it say that? And they said, oh, it's because you're promoting it to students. I'm like, no, I'm not telling students to buy this shirt or the sweater. I was like, this is a brand, this is a logo, just like Nike, just like any other logo that you're wearing, like hello. And then I said, show me an ed code where it says I can't wear this shirt. Show me where it says I can't do this, right? No, it's people's own personal insecurities that come out. Like, I don't tell you don't have an Instagram account and have a platform. Do it. I will support you 1000%, you know? So to the listener out there, I definitely would say like it pays to be informed. It pays for you to like be the expert of whatever it is that you're looking at, because that's what people bank on. They literally bank on Latinos not being educated. They bank on Latinos not speaking up. And I'm the complete opposite, and you got me messed up if you think I'm not gonna say anything. So that would be like my advice to whoever's listening. Like, don't be afraid, because that's what they want us to do. And that should tell you how much power you do have. If someone is trying to silence you or not have you speak at the table or even be at the table, I feel like that's even more of a reason why you should advocate and fight to say what you need to say or be in the rooms that you need to be in.
I love this so much, Christina. I was like, ya estaba enamorada de ti. And now I'm like, yes, like this is why you're here. I love it so much. And I love how you are using education and language, which has been oftentimes, you know, taken away from our community. And now you're saying, no, I'm going to match you at your own game with the tools that you want to use against me. And I think for me, just kind of zooming out a little bit and looking at the platform that you have built, which we're going to talk about that, I see not just as someone who is proud of their heritage, but I mean, an educada, like for me, that's just like, and when I'm saying educada, I'm not just talking about like having manners, right? Because sometimes in our cultura, we think of, oh, alguien educada tiene que tener manners, but I'm thinking about of the language and how you're using that to help other Latinas. And this is why you also built Latinas with Masters. So, what was the inspiration behind it? And what are some of the things that you have seen that the community really needs in terms of getting more Latinas to have a master's? I have a master's, but I'm also very one of the very few that made it to that.
Hmm. Ooh, girl, that's like the bread and butter of the whole conversation right there. So congratulations, because you're part of the 8% of Latinas with master's degree. And I know for sure you're gonna be on the Latinas with Masters podcast. So let's call that right now and schedule it. Because I would love people to hear your story as well, because I love your platform and I also fangirl you as well, girl. So kudos to that. I definitely feel that, man, like, where do I start? So I created Latinas with Masters because when I got admitted into my doctoral program, it reminded me being the only Latina in my master's program. And I remember being in my master's program, like, dude, where the Latinas at? Like, even Latinos, like, where are we? Like, is it that hard to get into grad school? Like, I was literally thinking that. I couldn't name that. I didn't know. Like, I even felt guilty even thinking that, you know? And so when I got admitted to my doctoral program, I was like, okay, I want to create a platform where I remember and also share my experience of being the only Latina in my master's program, but let me also share in real time my doctorate journey. Right. And authentically, I'm now about to hit like 6 years of having this platform. Authentically, Latinas with Masters became not only my method of survival when I was going through the merger, when I was dealing with microaggressions, when I was dealing with misogyny, like all these things, right? That as Latinos, we don't name, right? When I was sharing that on the platform, other Latinas were like, me too, right? They were like, oh, I've been through that as well. And look what happened to me. And look how I overcome. And let me share my story. And I want to be on your podcast. And let me share a post. And I'm going to connect you with this person because they also are going through that same thing, right? So I said that all to say is like, I don't, yes, I promote getting a degree, but I don't promote a graduate school program. I don't promote like a school, right? Like, I promote the journey, I promote community, I promote healing, but I also promote resistance, right? Because that does exist in that space as well. So, what higher education does not do, they don't believe in community. They want to act like they believe in community, but realistically, they don't. Because I've been in tables, I've been in conversations, and it's all about me, them, and not necessarily of how can we better serve the greater good of the student population, right? So I would say that Latinas with Masters became what the institutions are constantly failing to do. And that is to create culture and belonging for, you know, in my specific situation for Latina scholars, right?
Yeah.
Like, what did my master's program do to fail me to be the only Latina in that class? You know what I'm saying? And it wasn't until later on I found somebody, through the grace of God. She walked in through the door, like, oh my God. And, we became, BFFs, I like to call it, right? I'm still in communication with her, but I'm there like, what is it? And now working in higher education, now having these doctoral initials, I know that that's intentional. If you really wanted to increase the 8% of Latinas with master's degrees and the 1% of Latinas with doctorates, you would admit more Latinas in these programs. But that's very intentional, right? It's one thing to admit Latinas into a program and say, oh, we're 35% of Latinos, we're 12% of Latinos, whatever your percentage is. And it's one thing to say, and we graduate X percent of Latinos. And
Yeah.
that's the part where institutions fail. There, all these numbers that you see that they're X population of Latinos, it's how many are enrolled, but how many really graduate?
Yeah.
That right there is what they don't tell you. That's the side of education that I'm on, right? I'm looking at these numbers, right? So that's what Latinas with Masters is. It's not just about getting the degree, it's a community beyond academia, and it's not institutionalized. Yes, I speak at college campuses. Yes, I go in and motivate, college students, but the institution does not own me, does not control me. And that's the part that they don't like, right? They want to silence you know, anyone that is calling them out on what they're not doing, just like anyone would, right? But specifically in higher education, that's why sometimes communities like Latinas with Masters is a threat versus them seeing, hey, let's partner with Latinas with Masters to really increase not only the admission and enrollment of Latinas, but graduating Latinas in grad school, right? If they really were intentional about the work, they would contact me and be like, I have a cohort of Latinas right now. What can you do to motivate them, to talk to them, to what can we do better to make sure that every single person walks across the stage with a master's degree? And that's why when these graduate programs contact me and they're like, oh, we would love to pay you to talk about our program. And I'm like, okay, but are you going to waive the application fee? Are you going to waive the deposit? Is there a scholarship? What about student parents? They're not ready for that conversation, girl. So miss me with like your paid partnership. I have no paid partnership other than my own brand, right?
Yeah.
That reason. It's very intentional how I show up.
And I love that so much. As you were talking about how many Latinas are now actually graduating, I started to think back and reflect on the time when I was in community college. So I went to community college first, and I mean, when I was going to community college, there were very few Latinos that were part of that community college. And now, when I go back to community college as a speaker, I see so many Latinos at community college. But if I go to a 4 year university, that abundance of Latinos keeps shrinking. And
Yeah.
the more at the top,
So now the question becomes, okay, you have a large population of Latino students. What is the transfer rate of those students to a 4 year university? And that's the part where it's like, let's talk about it. Nobody wants to
I'm
talk
going
about
to
it.
start asking.
Yeah.
I'm going to start asking.
Yeah.
Now, I want to bring it back to another conversation on something that you do in the day to day, which is helping students with securing housing.
Hmm.
Walk us through a day in a life of what does that look like, and what are some maybe three takeaways that you want students to know as it relates to making sure that they have housing as they navigate higher education.
Hmm. Yeah, so I'm the director of basic needs. So I oversee students that are experiencing, food insecurity, housing security, mental health, wellness resources. I connect with all of that. But like my love language is housing resources, right? I have 15 years working in housing from the corporate sector. So I'm able to understand, the again, language, right? The process, the policies and stuff. So a day in the life is, you have a student that is housing insecure. Sometimes they're sleeping in their car. Sometimes they're couch surfing. Sometimes they are sleeping on the street. All things can exist, right? And so when a student comes to me with how that is housing insecure, I provide them with housing resources. It's not about just throwing a link or, go to this place and tell them you're housing insecure, right? It's doing the warm handoff, right? It's referring them to the agency, but having the agency understand, the student's circumstances because there's a lot of trauma with housing. And then to tell a student to not only did you just tell me and have to relive your story, now you have to relive it again with the agency and relive it again if you call Medi-Cal and then relive it, we're constantly reliving it. So I try to remove as much barriers and trauma for the student when I do a referral. But on top of that, I feel like what's unique in my situation is I provide housing education in the process. Like I'm telling a student that this is just temporary. Yes, you're going to be placed in temporary housing. You're going to be placed in a woman's shelter, right? Or a shelter, right? That's temporary. When you transition from permanent housing, your own apartment, this is what's going to be expected of you. You do have to show proof of employment. You do have to show current bank statements or current pay stubs. You have to have good credit and rental history. Rental history meaning you don't have any evictions. When I have those conversations with students, a lot of them are like, I didn't know I needed that. Yes, I have an eviction. No, I'm not employed. I'm formally incarcerated. I have a background, right? And the way that I see it is I'm not here to judge, regardless of what my personal biases are. At the end of the day, I'm serving students and I'm telling students what their options are, And so then what I tell them is, oh, so right now, the best, you know, pathway right now is for you to be in a temporary housing agency while you work on building your credit, while you work on, working with the clean slate program to remove, the misdemeanor or the felony that you have on your record. Right. Let's start working on employment. What does that look like? What can you do? Right. So connecting you with the career center or with local agencies. So it's not so much, and I say this all the time. Oh my God, I don't even know how to say this. Like, I felt like when in general, I feel like people feel like the solution to housing is throwing money at the problem. I can guarantee you that I've given students money for housing, but it's are they going to be able to maintain it, right? I can help you with the first month's rent. I can help you with the application fee. You can save up money for the deposit, but can you pay the second month's rent and the third month's rent and the fourth month's rent? That's where it gets, tricky, right? It's be able to maintain it and then also understanding what your housing rights are, knowing that you have until the first to pay rent. And by the third, you're going to get a 3-day notice if you're not paying rent. And the landlord has every right to process an eviction. So it's also telling students beyond the application. It's when you're in the apartment, this is what you're signing. You're signing a legal binding contract. This is a transaction. Unfortunately, this is a business, right? You pay rent to live in these four walls, but you don't pay rent, you violated the contract, right? So I feel like when I tell students in simplest terms, they're able to understand it now. They're able to take it more seriously. And then I tell them, if you want to become a homeowner one day, guess what? When I purchased my home, they asked me, "Can you give me 2 years of rental history?" I paid my landlord. I lived like in a mom and pop apartment, like small 7-unit complex. I paid her by money order. I had to go back and look for the money orders through the grace of God that I had like in a shoebox, you know? And then they had to match that with my bank statement to see that I withdrew $995, $1,400 that matched the money order for that month on that day. Like, being a homeowner is very serious too, you know? So I tell
Yes.
people all the time, like, please, please, please take care of your rental history because the goal is for you to become a homeowner, you know? That
Yeah.
is the true meaning of, financial wealth. This is not even my house. This is my kids' homes. This is my grandkids' homes. That's the goal, you know?
I love these. The intentionality behind how you're helping the students navigate from housing insecurity to now seeing what is coming ahead, right? Like I tend to kind of gravitate from not using the word financial responsibility because I feel like there's so many hidden things there.
For
But
sure.
you're essentially teaching them like, hey, if you have your plan, you're gonna get to this result, which is for a lot of people is having the home security that we didn't have growing up. And so I'm just drooling over how you are describing the intentionality behind the work that you do with the students. So thank you so much for doing that. Now, I'm not gonna let you go without asking you, what is your definition of wealth?
Man. Woo! Wealth is knowledge. Wealth is knowledge, honestly. I think, because we live in a capitalist, society, wealth is going to be defined with money. And that is part of wealth. That can be wealth, right? Again, all these things can exist, right? But I think wealth is knowledge. Wealth is community. Wealth is healing. All these things are wealth. I definitely feel like it's up to us to reframe what wealth means to us. Wealth is going to look different for every single person. You know what I'm saying? Someone told me one day, you celebrities have problems too. It's just money is not one of them, right? And I always think about that, right? Like, we all have problems, but we don't have the same problems. You know what I'm saying? So I say that to you because the nada me sirve for me to gatekeep the wealth that I carry of knowledge, of education, of getting through grad school, of being a mother in grad school, learning how, like, having housing, like, all that makes no sense for me to hold on to it. For what? Right? So for me, wealth is knowledge, wealth is sharing, wealth is community, wealth is healing. I know I said that, but like, really, like, think about what does that mean for you, right? And how does that show up in your life? Or how can, if you want to have, you know, healing as wealth, what does that look like for you? Like, be intentional. And I feel like that's something that I have to practice with myself, with self-care, right? Self-care is also wealth, right? I think we're so used to, like, as immigrant daughters, right? Immigrant children, like, you get up, you go to work, you do your job, you come home, you cook, you clean, and then you're done, right? But like, we have to learn how to, like, pivot that, and that's okay. It's okay to take rest. Rest is
Yes.
wealth. Rest is wealth, girl. And
Yes.
I'm learning how to rest, believe it or not, because I feel like I don't rest sometimes because we do have that hustle culture mentality.
It's ingrained. It's part of the DNA. Before I came to the office, which is, by the way, my house, my home office. I was so excited to having this conversation with you. And like automatically, I wanted to just start like, oh my God, like I want to be prepared for her. I was doing all of this and I said, no, just go work out and then come back and just have the conversation, which I love that the self-care portion of what is wealth. Now, Doctora Cristina Rodriguez can be found at latinaswithmasters.com. Make sure you give her a follow. Check the link in the show notes. And if you love this episode, please take a screenshot, tag us on Instagram or LinkedIn, wherever you are, because we need to have more representation when it comes to doctoras. And Viniste, porque I've always been like following you and I was like, yeah, yeah. And sometimes it takes a little while for us to come, but thank you so much for coming to the
Of
show.
course.
And let's go ahead and build wealth.
There you go. Bye.